Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. It's November 4th, 2025, Tuesday, 760 days since October 7th of 2023. We've been doing these daily videos seek to give witness to every life of the 68,000 plus people who've been killed in Gaza, for the people who were killed on that day on October 7th and since from Israel and other parts of the world. May our giving witness help raise awareness, but also may our actions and advocacy help contribute towards peace. So this is news from the last 24 hours, day 760. Israeli troops yesterday killed 3 Palestinians in Gaza near the city of Rafah. This is according to local health authorities. The Israeli military said in a statement that the forces struck, quote, terrorists who crossed the yellow line and advanced towards Israeli troops. I've been talking to people about whether or not the ceasefire is going to hold and what the next steps are and whether or not this is really a pathway to self-determination for the Palestinian people. And from an earthly perspective, may I just say, the divisions of Gaza, the ongoing occupation in the West Bank, the number of deaths, the ongoing displacement, the trajectory still is not moving in a positive direction. Israel yesterday handed over the bodies of 45 Palestinians to Gaza. This follows the remains of 3 hostages that were returned to Israel on Sunday. The exchange rate, as horrific it is to say, 15 Palestinian bodies for every Israeli body is a part of the current agreement. The United States did send a draft resolution to the United Nations, the Security Council, for the establishment of this international security force, the ISF. The idea would be that the ISF would be the transitional force in Gaza until the end of 2027. And I wanted to call attention to this. Axios did an article about it, where they talked about how a U.S. official said that the draft resolution will be the basis for negotiations in coming days. The goal is to vote in coming weeks and to deploy troops into Gaza as early as January. The ISF would be, quote, an enforcement force and not a peacekeeping force, end quote, and would work with the Board of Peace, the one that Trump will be the chair of, tasked with governing Gaza through the transitional period. The draft resolution says the force will be empowered to use all necessary measures to carry out its mandate so that it acts in accordance with international law, including international humanitarian law. Now, the scoop was provided by Axios, and the U.S. is seeking the UN approval for this security force. Part of that is because many of the countries that might actually send troops, in order for them to be able to do so, they need a UN Security Council resolution. So the idea is that this force would be in effect for roughly 2 years. It matters. The draft resolution is designated sensitive but unclassified. It would give the United States and other participating countries the broad mandate of the governance of Gaza. And that also includes the provision of security. Now, what's that mean? In large part, that would be the force that is responsible for the demilitarization and the transition of Hamas out of Gaza. So driving the news, the draft resolution would be the basis for negotiations between UN Security Council members. The U.S. has stressed that this international security force, ISF, would be the enforcement force and not a peacekeeping force. So the purpose of this group is really, really critical to understand. It would involve troops from several countries. They would establish this force in consultation with the Board of Peace. So President Trump would be the head of this Board of Peace that is supposed to remain in place at least through the end of 2027. The ISF would be tasked with securing the Gaza borders, both with Israel and with Egypt. They would be tasked with protecting civilians. One of the concerns I've heard is that some people who are critical of this idea feel like the ISF would be more about protecting Israeli soldiers than Palestinian civilians. So there's a question of how this group, would relate with the different actors on the ground. The idea is that they would stabilize the security environment in Gaza by ensuring the process of demilitarizing the Strip, including the destruction and prevention of rebuilding of military, terror, offensive infrastructure, as well as the permanent decommissioning of weapons from non-state armed groups, i.e. Hamas and other militant groups in Gaza. The suggested mandate does include the disarmament of Hamas if the group or elements within it don't do so voluntarily. So Axios is saying what to watch. The resolution calls for the empowerment of this Board of Peace as a transitional government structure administration, that they will set the priorities to raise funding for the Gaza reconstruction until the Palestinian Authority, quote, has satisfactorily completed its reform program, end quote, and is signed off by the Board of Peace. According to the draft resolution, the Board of Peace will supervise and support the Palestinian Technocratic Apolitical Committee of competent Palestinians from the Strip, which shall be responsible for day-to-day operations from Gaza's civil service and administration. So all of that was from Axios. Moving on to Israel, the Israeli police arrested the former top military prosecutor, the Major General Yafat Tomer Yushalami. I've been talking about her. They arrested her on suspicion of serious criminal offenses after she admitted to leaking that video that showed the Israeli soldiers assaulting the Palestinian detainee in the State-Haman facility. Moving on to the broader Middle East, the Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani said this week that Iraq could bring weapons under state control, all weapons under state control, only after the U.S.-led anti-Islamic State coalition withdraws, as some Iraqi factions are viewing the U.S. presence or the U.S.-led anti-Islamic coalition as an occupying force. That's in Iraq. In terms of Washington, D.C. and the U.S., Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is set to visit President Trump at the White House on November 18th. A White House official said yesterday regarding a possible U.S.-Saudi defense agreement. There's discussions about signing something when the prince goes to D.C., but the details seem to be in flux. I also just heard that President Abbas is going to be visiting the Vatican in coming weeks as well. Also, today is the day of that New York City mayoral election with Zohran Mamdani. And so results for that are coming in. The polls have shown that ever since his victory in the Democratic primary, Zohran Mamdani has been the clear favorite to win. Polls aggregated by the New York Times have Mamdani anywhere from 5 to 25 points ahead of his opponents, Curtis Sliwa, the Republican candidate, and Andrew Cuomo, who entered the race as an independent after losing the Democratic primary. Wanted to close just with a Christian update. It has to do with a conversation I find myself in quite regularly these days. Conversations about why is Tucker Carlson paying so much attention to Palestinian Christians? And why are some far-right politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene saying some of the same things we are, even though there's much that she says that continues to be quite problematic? What is all of this about? What in the world is happening? And I thought that I would just point you to a specific example. If you have not seen the YouTube video, which is Tucker Carlson's interview, it premiered on August 11th of this year, 2025, with Mother Agapia Stephanopoulos. Today, it has 1,987,030 views, just under 2 million views. The conversation is about what's happening in the Palestinian territories. And the description of the episode says this: self-described evangelicals like Ted Cruz and Mike Johnson have no interest in how Israel treats Christians. But Mother Agapia Stephanopoulos has spent years living in the region. They should listen to her. One of my favorite parts is that Tucker Carlson says there aren't any Christian groups who are working to support Palestinians. And Mother Agapia says immediately, Churches for Middle East Peace is. And in fact, you can see in the notes of the episode, Tucker Carlson is pointing people to CMEP. Our link is in the notes of the episode. So we have some unsuspecting allies, but my encouragement is that we do need to come together across differences. And I wanted to just share some of the words with you that Mother Agapia says in her closing message to Christians in the episode. He says, Tucker Carlson, how do you think this story ends? And Mother Stephanopoulos says, it depends on us. That's why maybe part of me wants to have that message that we have to do something politically. Christians have to wake up and tell the story of what's happening, because it's all in the hand of the United States. It doesn't matter what other countries in the world do. If the U.S. protects Israel, this will continue, and we will get to the conclusion of the developments, which will ultimately lead to a third world war or something of that sort for sure. but also in a spiritual sense. We have to recognize that what do we want to be as people? Do we want to follow the way of Christ, or do we want to follow the way of Christ that leads to a better world? We live in this world as best as we can in order to prepare for the world to come. Look, Christ said, "My kingdom is not of this world." So if you are truly a believing Christian, you want to do all the things that you can, all the things that will put you in the good graces of God when it comes to Judgment Day, right? And that doesn't mean rebuilding a temple. It doesn't mean all of that. It means living like a Christian and trying to build a society that lives by Christian principles, and your government acting as one that acts by Christian principles. And so what does it mean? It doesn't mean slaughtering other people and leading to their cleansing. She closed with these words: the only way that it's going to break is by enough of us saying, enough influencers going over there and saying, "I want to see what's going on," and then reporting back the things we've seen. So she says to Tucker Carlson, "Thank you for giving me this little opportunity. Might hope move in the right direction." That's my hope and prayer for us today as we continue on the journey of seeking peace and following the Prince of Peace. In the name of Christ, amen.